So Arma 3's three-part campaign is complete, and no one can really deny it's pretty content-filled. Depending on your skill level, each segment could take anything from around 4 to 10 hours, depending on what you want to do and how you really want to do it. But Part 2 was certainly the longest and greatest instalment. Episodes 1 and 2 were already reviewed, and you can see those videos linked at the end of this one, but let's quickly recap for those who haven't seen them. Episode 1 takes place on Stratus, and it's a relatively dry campaign offering only the basics of infantry combat with some UAV drone control, which was pretty cool admittedly, but it wasn't a good start to the series campaign. Episode 2 is on Altis, where Kerry, the player from the campaign, must try and regroup with other splinter groups of both British and Greek origin. The island is of course fictional, but hey, they're Greek. Part 2 offered a lengthy and well-designed set of player choice-based skirmishes challenging both your intellect and your FPS skills. A real throwback to the classic FPS games, and well worth playing. It ended on a high. That high was unjustified in Part 3, however, as this short campaign is sloppy and somehow both overly and under-ambitious, again offering only infantry combat with assault weapons. And before I move on, I just want to ask, where are the missions where you're sent to perhaps assassinate X commander in Y town with whatever weapon you want, picking your own way of getting there? I can't help but feel the amazing 270 kilometers of Altis have been wasted, offering only scripted events in certain places. There's no chance to explore in the campaign, and that's a real shame. Ultimately, it made Altis seem somehow smaller than Takistan, due to only the fact that it feels misused, with forests and wide open spaces making the bulk of the combat. Without any spoilers, Win, the third part, sees Kerry reunited with his US regiment, thus putting him back to work in his usual military role. The Brits and Greek splinter groups, Kerry is told, are to be ignored and you're to offer no assistance to them. They're essentially out of the game now, right up until the end, and your primary task is to command a handful of units in defending and retaking the island. This is not quite as fantastic as it sounds though, because you don't really get to fly a jet, and you don't get to drive a tank, and you don't get to choose what you want to do aside from a few pivotal moments. Everything we've played so far has implied a huge armoured counter-offensive, and while there are certainly moments where you patrol on foot with BMPs and get a little extra taste of watching minor tank battles, it's all really underwhelming and really quite small. It doesn't feel like the invasion that was pending, and there isn't any more narrative intrigue until the twists end. In short, it sort of rehashes everything we've already done so far, the same weapons, same combat, same skirmishes, only these are frustrating and not really as enjoyable as the others. This is my biggest problem with Win. You're sent to do things with very little information, despite all the information provided at the start of the mission, and I know that sounds like a contradictory statement. I stopped reading it in the end because the campaign kept throwing curveballs. Do this, that and the other became do this, that and oh god it's all changed, followed by some vague orders about something coming up. This is perfectly illustrated when you're asked over and over again in Win to defend certain areas on foot. I had to defend a point from an unknown force, which turned out to be 3 T-100 tanks and 4 APCs. I had a rocket launcher, which is useless against T-100s that I picked up from the armory before the match, and my AI companion had a Titan. I could also put one AI on the mounted Titan, which was the only useful emplacement, and I died around 16 times in a row because tanks and armour are incredibly fast, and the AI in armour is incredibly slow.
Flying around out there too. Hold the line. Tank, 400 meters, northeast. Tank, 300 meters. He's hit.
That's where this is overly ambitious. It plays clunky, clunkier than Arma 2, and controlling your units without knowing what's coming is tantamount to impossible. Unless they're on an emplacement, their visibility is weak, and unless you tell X soldier to attack Y unit and wait about 5 minutes for him to do it, you're not going to get anything out of them when it comes to armoured enemies. They're much better with infantry. So all this infantry versus armour that happens in Win is fundamentally flawed to the point of broken. In a strange sort of victory for me, however, I managed to hone my skills a bit and took out most tanks with satchel charges cleverly flanking around, but that was just to circumvent how broken everything felt. This is largely what Win comprises of, attacking enemy emplacements and then defending them. There were awesome moments where you can control a UAV and guide artillery strikes down on an area, or call in a helo attack to assist you, but that's about all the vehicular combat you're really privy to. Once that's all out of the way, and I won't reveal the spoiler, you're finally tasked with escaping off the island as a wave of mysterious earthquakes rattle Altis. On foot with no vehicle in sight, you can choose to assist and rescue people all over the island or simply head to one of the many exit points. In the dark and without a vehicle, I ran a total of 5 kilometers for about 2 hours before being shot dead out of the blue, only for the credits to roll. Dying was a rather witty, optional ending to the game, but considering I just spent 2 hours of my life running around Altis earnestly trying out some of the more interesting endings, it wasn't very funny. Sure, you could find a car, but after the mediocrity that was the Win campaign, I didn't feel like searching thousands of buildings where 9.9 out of 10 cars were destroyed for narrative reasons just to find one that worked. Just to have its engine explode because of some bug with the physics engine. Shot. Dead. The moments prior to this point were a convoluted and confusing narrative mess, wherein the Brits are or are not traitors, claiming they'll come back for you, but after a cutscene they don't and you need to escape. There's some truck-bound weapon involved without explanation, and by this point I sort of had the impression Part 3 Win was a jumbled mess of unbalanced objectives, nowhere near as interesting as Part 2, with 5 minutes worth of writing right at the end just to tick a box. Maybe not enough people were playing the campaign to justify the cost of making it, but it's clear that Bohemia aren't interested in delivering interesting campaign or single-player content, and the Arma series is destined to player-created content, which has so far delivered little along the lines of proper, in-depth military simulation of a high quality.
Somebody help me!
I guess I'll just forget about this proposed milsim and fuck about on Altis Light. It's probably easier for Bohemia Interactive, but it's not what I paid £39.99 for. Sure, the streamlined movement mechanics and graphical improvements are nice, but Arma 3 remains a quarter of the game its predecessor is. Play Arma 3's campaign for Part 2 and its modding community, but if you wanted a proper milsim, expect to dig for content yourself, in your own time, because Bohemia clearly aren't interested in delivering it so much as crowd-pleasing gimmicks. And that's a shame, because there are about 400 crowd-pleasing gimmicks on early access. We didn't really need another one. Ultimately, Bohemia seemed to have wasted the beauty and scale of Altis in the campaign. You can look at it as a gift to the content creators, or you can look at it merely as a car without a real driver. Sometimes it's nice to have professionally created single-player content delivered to you in the $39.99 price tag without having to jump through loopholes to find it yourself. Perspective perhaps, but Win cements the idea in my mind that Bohemia have changed their direction dramatically, and it's one I'm sure will please a lot of people, but one that's delivered historically underwhelming content. At least there's jets now, a year after the alpha released, way after the retail release date. As a fan of the Arma series, I'm still waiting for an excuse to try everything out in real, full-scale epic missions. We need a campaign for jets, we need a campaign for tanks, we need a campaign for the sub and for sniping, at least single-player scenarios of each. I hope Bohemia get to work on those because I didn't pay $39.99 for a modder to do it for them for free.